All right, we're gonna get started here. Looks like most of the people are on. Want to thank everybody for coming to our webinar. We hope this can be helpful. We'll have some live polls throughout the event, so feel free to participate. We actually encourage it. Makes it a little more fun than just kind of staring at a screen for 45 minutes. And also feel free to ask any questions throughout the webinar. You can throw them in the chat. You can raise your hand. We'll do our best to get those answered. And after this, I will make sure I try to send everybody this slide deck. If any questions come up after the webinar, you can always feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to even do some one-on-ones to explain some stuff in more detail. And with that, we'll jump into the agenda for the webinar. So today in this webinar, we're going to be doing an introduction background so you guys know actually who we are and who's going to be giving this presentation. Myself and the two other security experts on our team. I'll do a little introduction, little background. Then we're going to jump into business impact analysis, protecting your business impact and business disruptions, and just how we can create a fast recovery. After that, we're going to jump into some real world breaches, some of them that you've probably heard about already. Some are going to just be some examples from our team's experience. Then we're going to talk a little bit about why small to medium sized businesses are big targets. We're not flying under the radar anymore. We'll talk a little bit about calculating your risk tolerance and how you can do that. And then we're going to have some resources for small to medium sized businesses. And then with that, we'll wrap up with live questions and answers. Yeah, so if you have any questions throughout the webinar, then just feel free to throw them in the chat at the end. We'll actually open it up for live questions. And with that, we will meet our team. All right, you have me on there. My name is Justin Vredeveld. I am the Business Development Manager here at Ontech. I have the pleasure of working alongside Jared and Blake. Jared Olson is our security team lead. He is the fearless leader of the security team with over 13 years here at Ontech, 20 plus years experience in the industry. We also have Blake Milkey. He is our incident response lead. He has about 3 years here at Ontech and 10 plus years experience in the industry. Both these guys are on the front lines for all of the security incidents for our clients, and they always work very, very hard to prevent any security incidents. With that, we will dive into our second bullet point, business impact analysis. So business disruptions, they can come in so many forms: cyber attacks, power outages, network failures, natural disasters, equipment malfunctions, and supply chain breakdowns. What are the risks? Loss of revenue, reduced productivity, and reputational damage, which can be really, really hard to recover from. The real question is, how much risk can your company tolerate? Little vulnerabilities that go unnoticed today can turn into huge crises tomorrow. So the key takeaway is just identifying weaknesses early is the best defense against costly disruptions. And with that, before I turn it over to Jared, I'm going to try and throw a poll out and ask, what is the first thing you do when an employee reports their computer is acting strangely and they can't access files? Panic, cry, pray, investigate, sign on logs, call Ontech. Not a bad one. Network ASAP. Awesome. Yeah, and with that, I'll turn it over to Jared.
Thanks, Justin. Thanks for the good intro. Thanks for everybody's feedback there. I think a lot of us would panic and do a lot of the things that everybody's saying here in the poll. So thanks for your participation as well. I know a lot of you because I've been at Ontech for 13 years, but some of you I don't know. So nice to meet you. And we'll get started with the next slide here. So when we think, or when I think about business impact analysis or business continuity, I think about a few different things. So the overarching umbrella of all of this is business continuity. How can you keep your operations running in the event of a cyber incident, in the event of a power outage, in the event of a natural disaster, flood, things like that. So business continuity management is a strategic and operational framework helping organizations prepare for, respond to, and recover from disruptive incidents. And during that process, you want to ensure that you're able to keep those critical business functions continuing without much impact or with minimal impact. Business continuity management does not focus on every single business process. I want to make sure that that's clear because there's a lot of things that a business has to do and keep up and running to operate, but rather the most critical things. So what are the absolutely most critical things that need to continue to operate during a disaster or a scenario such as that? During a disaster, it's not generally possible to keep every part of the system running. So in business continuity management, we really need to determine what those processes are, the most critical, what we can focus on to limit the resources during that disaster. So there's three things to think about there. Obviously, you want to make sure the safety of your people. Number one, most important goal is to ensure the safety of your people. People are the most valuable asset in any organization, and without people, there will be no organization. Second thing would be minimizing the damage. So number two is making sure that you're attempting to minimize the impact, minimize the damage caused by a potential disaster or incident. And then number three, probably the most important here is survival of the business. So there's two different kind of plans that go into a business impact analysis. One is the business continuity. How can you keep the business operational no matter what? And number two would be disaster recovery. That's more about getting your technology back online after it goes down. So here we just have the definition of a business impact analysis. It's a process of predicting the organizational and financial impact of a business disruption, collects relevant data to aid businesses in creating the fastest recovery strategies to get back to normal operations after inevitable consequences. And there's some key steps you have to think about when you're looking at how to conduct a business impact analysis. You want to make sure that, like I said earlier, defining or determining what those critical and essential functions are for your organization's survival and success. You want to make sure that you're collecting data about those critical business functions. You know, what processes do you use? What processes need to be followed or kept operational? What are your peak periods or your most busy times, so to speak, and what resources are needed for those business functions? And then you kind of move into the analyzing the impact. So these are things like your assets. What are the impacts to your assets? Financial loss, operational disruption, legal, regulatory penalties. A lot of times people don't think about the reputational damage or the customer dissatisfaction, but that plays into a business impact analysis as well. And then ranking those critical functions based on their importance and the severity of the impact. So one thing too to consider is assessing that impact over time. So if you think about how the impact of a disruption increases over time, for example, between 0 to 4 hours, this is what the impact's going to be. If it's between 4 to 24 hours, this is what could be affected, and this is the financial loss or the processes that could be interrupted, or hopefully not, but sometimes we see this as well, 1 to 3 days or more. And it really helps you determine a couple terms that I'm going to talk about here in a little bit, and that would be one, your recovery time objective. Sometimes you'll see that just listed as RTO, so recovery time objective, and recovery point objectives, or RPO. So as you're going through that, you also want to identify the resource requirements. You know, once you've established those critical functions and you know what they need to operate, you got to think about what staff is involved with that, what kind of equipment might be involved with that, what are the IT systems related, is it facility related, are there third-party services that also need to kind of function as part of those resources. So benefits of a BIA would be to provide valuable insights for making strategic decisions. I'm a big believer in uh, basing strategic decisions off of assessments and being able to kind of analyze where things sit for a particular organization. And this is an ongoing thing. This isn't something you just do once. This is something you should continue to do and think about as a business owner. The second thing would be helping develop effective recovery and continuity plans. Third, ensuring resources are allocated to the most critical areas. And then lastly, kind of that risk mitigation component of what the potential risks are and help in trying to mitigate those risks. This is just kind of a different example of how you could think about your business impact analysis. So on the left side of that slide here, you'll see critical processes that we've identified. Order fulfillment oftentimes is a very critical process for business. And what you'll see there also is the RTO. That's the recovery time objective. In this scenario, that particular business function or process can survive a 2-hour recovery time objective or requires a 2-hour recovery time objective. But the RPO, the recovery point objective, is 5 minutes. So you want to make sure that as orders are getting fulfilled, as orders are getting entered and processed, that you're not really losing a long period of time. The second critical process identified in this example is a customer service portal. So recovery time objective here is 4 hours and the recovery point objective is 1 hour. And as you move through the rest of this slide, if you think about the potential financial impacts or reputational impacts of this, in this example, $50,000 per hour of downtime for order fulfillment could be something very considerable for any business. And the loss of customer trust after a certain period of time can absolutely affect reputation. So a couple recommendations. One thing would be implementing redundant servers for your ordering system, enhancing the backup frequency for customer data, so making sure that if you do lose data, you're really able to you're only losing a small period of that data that was entered into the system. And then you could create a visual, so maybe a bar chart that would show downtime costs for the top 3 processes that you have. And then at the bottom here, there's an image of RPO, RTO, and another term that I haven't referenced yet, WRT, and then MTD. So I'll talk very briefly about that, but I wanted to give a couple other examples. So in manufacturing, if a critical machine fails during production, it will stop your production and it could impact your order fulfillment. If you're in healthcare, a hospital identifies that patient care and surgery scheduling as critical operations that must be maintained. That's just another kind of critical process for all of healthcare. In retail, an e-commerce company evaluates the impact of website being down on its operations. And in financial institutions, a bank recognizes payment processing as a critical business function that must be protected. So RPO, so if you think about these stages as you go through from the timeline down below, stage 1 being business as usual, stage 2 being a disaster occurring or an incident occurring, you really want to think about the maximum acceptable amount of data loss measured in time. So for example, if you can tolerate 15 minutes worth of data loss, then that would be your recovery point objective. As you move forward into the stages of recovery, you think about the recovery time. How long does it actually take to get systems back online or critical systems back online? So think about your backup or a fix or a failure of equipment. And in most cases, that involves your IT department or your IT functions. And then as you continue to move forward towards resuming and getting closer to that resuming production, you think about your working recovery time. So what's the maximum tolerable amount of time to verify a system, make sure data is operational, and the integrity of that data is intact. And then if you combine the RTO and the WRT here, you get your MTD, which is maximum tolerable downtime, which defines the total amount of time that a business process can be disrupted without causing unacceptable consequences. And this is something that the business management team or somebody like a CTO, CIO, IT manager should be considering and thinking about. And I will turn it over to Blake for the next couple slides here.
Thanks, Jared. Unfortunately, my webcam is not functional at the moment. I found that out minutes before this meeting started, so I'd like to apologize in advance for that. What we're going to do is first we're going to go through a case study of some small, medium-sized businesses hit by cyber incidents. First one we're going to go through is a healthcare organization that experiences ransomware and loses access to patient records. Now, the impacts of this ransomware and the loss of access to patient records are going to be felt in several different areas. First and foremost, from the operational perspective, that healthcare organization will not be able to access any sort of electronic health record, which means that patients are getting delays in their treatment and processing. From the financial aspect, that's quite obvious. If they can't operate as normal, not only are their patients in trouble, but they are also losing money. In addition to that, there's going to be some sort of regulatory or government related impact as well. It could be anything from class action suits, or it could be anything to that extent, really. From a reputational perspective, there's going to be a loss of trust from the patients as well as negative media exposure. And if this ransomware attack successfully exfiltrates data and posts it online for anyone to view, that's going to be a huge HIPAA violation right there. For our second case study, let's take a look at a hypothetical financial service firm. They lose their core banking system due to any number of cyber attacks. It could be a DDoS attack, could be ransomware, or it could be a simple outage. Now, what that means is that customers will not only be able to access their accounts, they won't be able to perform any sort of transactions. That in turn has financial implications, as there are going to be penalties for violating SLAs. There's going to be fees lost from transactions, and it's going to potentially impact their stock if they're a publicly traded company. As for reputation, that's going to cause loss of trust in customers and investors. And then, just like with the previous example with HIPAA violations, there's going to be all sorts of financial implications and potential lawsuits as well. Now, for our third case study, we're going to take a look at a hypothetical manufacturing company. In this case, ransomware infects a industrial control system. Now, what does that mean from the operational perspective? It means that they're going to have halted production and there's going to be delay in shipments. From a financial perspective, it means that there are going to be deadlines that are missed for deliveries. There's going to be penalties from contracts, and there's going to be costs in overtime for their employees to be able to try and get everything back up to speed when they're able to do so. From a reputational perspective, it's going to impact their brand liability, and it's going to put a strain on customer relations. In addition, as they're trying to respond and react to this cyber incident, there is the human tendency of people getting reckless or making some sort of mistake. So there's going to be a potential increase of accidents and equipment damage, which then could have further operational and financial impacts as well. Now, for our fourth example, we're going to examine a retail chain that just got breached and had customer payment information publicly exposed. In those sorts of scenarios, what's going to happen first and foremost is everything is going to be shut down. So the affected systems are going to be taken offline. So there's going to be an operational impact of those systems simply not being available. The financial impact of that is going to be fines, credit monitoring systems like such as LifeLocks, and then there's also going to be financial impact of notifying everyone of the breach. It might seem like a small point, but it's actually one of the most time-intensive aspects of responding to this sort of a cybersecurity scenario. And just like the previous example, there's going to be a loss of customer trust on the reputational side. And with that, there will also be a reduction in sales. If not due to the operational impact, it will be due to the reputational impact as well. And from the legal and regulatory aspect, there's going to be PCI, DSS noncompliance, and then class action lawsuits, similar to what we're seeing now with Apple and Surrey. That's fundamentally the same. And for our fifth and final case study, we're going to take a look at a government agency that's had a DDoS, a distributed denial of service attack on a public service portal. Could be anything from getting your license renewed at the DMV to applying for food stamps. From an operations perspective, those citizens will be unable to access any critical services, which for a government agency is going to be severely impacting. It's going to result in public dissatisfaction and political fallout. One of the best examples historically, if we go back to the change.org rollout about 13 years ago, that was, at that time, that was widely politicized and it had a disastrous impact due to how poorly it was managed and executed. We've also seen from that instance and from others increased security concerns as well for those government entities. What a lot of times threat actors do is they will use publicly exposed information from government entities and then use that as a segue to launch new types of attacks. And that also brings us into compliance and regulatory impacts as well, which are unfortunately all too common these days. It's going to unfortunately end careers, as we've seen many, many times. Now, for our ransomware case study, these are actual, unlike the previous examples, these are not hypothetical. These are real, and these actually happened. The United Healthcare and Change Healthcare, that all occurred due to stolen account credentials that didn't require any sort of multi-factor authentication. The threat actors were then able to remote in and launch ransomware on some servers that were supposed to be supposed to be obsolete and no longer active. That turned out not to be the case, and ended up costing, I want to say, around $24 million in ransom alone, not including downtime, as well as reputational and operational costs. For Ascension Healthcare, that was simply a single employee downloading a malicious file onto a company device. For a recent example that we've seen firsthand, we saw a business-to-business online distributor that did not have properly configured remote access security that allowed a threat actor to exploit an old account and launch ransomware across their entire organization. We also saw with Oracle, there was, I want to say in the past 60 days, there was a vulnerability that was exploited on an old server of theirs used to deploy malware. And unfortunately, Oracle made the wrong move, and they learned the hard way that the cover-up is worse than the crime. They spent, I want to say, about a week denying that there was any sort of an incident happening, and the threat actor was able to not only prove that was false, they were able to exfiltrate a recorded meeting of the top executives talking about the incident that they claimed did not exist and posting that publicly. There was recently an incident with Bell Ambulance, and that was, again, they did not have proper multi-factor authentication with email or with remote access. And another example that we saw fairly recently was a manufacturing company that, for the most part, was doing everything properly. They had everything in place that they should have. There was no reason for this to happen. It shouldn't have happened, really. But what ended up happening was a zero-day exploit was exploited for a remote managing software that they used within their organization. It was made publicly announced and publicly known about, I want to say 12 to 20 hours prior to the threat actor actually launching an attack. So when there are these news bulletins that come out about exploits, vulnerabilities, 0 days, not only are the good guys, for lack of a better term, looking at those, the threat actors, the bad guys, are as well. There are hundreds of other examples that you can find at ransomware.live. That is more or less a repository of previous and active ransomware incidents that are made publicly known. It's provided by a group of what are called a blue team, the good guys, the cyber defenders. It's updated and posted by those guys, as well as insurance firms that deal with cybersecurity incidents and have correspondence with the threat actors themselves.
All right, I'm going to talk a little bit about why small to medium-sized businesses are targeted. I hear several people say, we're just a small business. We have nothing to worry about. We'll fly under the radar. That's not true anymore. The size makes them attractive targets. Small businesses are attractive targets because they tend to have less security features due to budget. Not every business has an infinite budget, and the bad actors, they know that. Um, they know you're less likely to have, the best of the best for security. And cost of skilled personnel and security controls. Cybersecurity experts and advanced security measures like, threat detection software, SOCs, Sentinel-1, they can be really, really costly, and that doesn't fit in everybody's budget. They're industry-specific risks. Their info is very, very valuable to the bad actors. If you do HR in-house, you have payroll info, you have bank account information, social security numbers, you have customer information. That is all super, super valuable to these bad actors. If you're taking payments from your customers, they can get even more information. And then even some of the smaller, like medical industries, they have a lot of medical records, which, are highly sought after for these bad actors. There are also work environment risks like remote security vulnerabilities, VPN, employee access, etc. VPN security vulnerabilities for remote employees is a big one. You could have like a weak or misconfigured VPN, and that can definitely expose your employees. If you're letting your employees use personal devices, we did a seminar, coffee brief last month on MDM. If you want to hear more about that, you can reach out to me. But when an employee uses their own personal device and they have, Outlook and Teams, you can't control all of the security features on that device. You can't control the screen lock timer. You can't control the passcodes. If they have their personal email on that device and they're clicking on stuff, you can't control that. So that's one thing to look out for.
Before we can even begin managing risk, we need to first define risk. In order to define risk, we need to understand how businesses operate. Um, from all the way to the top, the entire mission to the day-to-day business function and processes. There are risks that are inherent to every level of a business and operation, and before they can be managed, they need to first be defined. Now, people have been asking me for years, it's 2025, how can I reduce or eliminate my risks? And the fact is, it can't be eliminated. Risks can only be minimized and managed. That's ultimately what risk tolerance is about, being able to determine what types of risks are acceptable or unacceptable for your business. To be able to properly determine those risks, you need to either accept or transfer those risks. That's where things like backup, recovery plans, business continuity, managed detection and response for endpoints, all those are tools that come into play here. And they're ultimately going to be the tools that are used to build up that strategy for being able to have business resilience and being able to operate reliably. There are some very distinct steps that you can take to be able to assess your vulnerability level, even from a broad perspective, which are on the next slide. Sorry. And that brings us to defense in depth. These are ultimately redundant layers of protections. We can see here at the outer part of the circle, we have policies, procedures, and awareness, which then brings us to the physical security controls that we can put in place. And then you can see it goes all the way down from physical to data. Each one of these layers needs to have its own security controls in place. For physical, that could be something as simple as having locks on your door. It could also be something as complex as having role-based access to important IT infrastructure areas, such as server rooms or network closets. What's important is that each one of these controls is employed for each level of defense in depth. It doesn't matter how great your policies and procedures are if anyone can just walk anywhere, or if you have a single password that everyone shares, or even worse, if your data is simply stored in a a spreadsheet that everyone can access. I've unfortunately seen many times passwords.xlxs that's publicly available on SharePoint or a file server that anyone in the organization can access. What's very important is to always remember that no single method protects against all types of attacks. That is something that, unfortunately, I've seen many times. Individuals will say, "Well, we had such and such in place. Like we had multi-factor authentication in place. How could this have happened?" And that my response to that would be, yes, you had multi-factor authentication in place, but you did not have it configured across all users and across all accounts. Which leads me to my last point is misconfigured or insufficient controls can result in some sort of collateral damage. If not due to an incident, it can also lead to operational impacts as well and collateral damage in that respect. Nothing is 100% effective is ultimately how I would describe defense in depth. It's important to have redundant measures in place to act as safeguards for if and when some layer of defense in depth fails.
Thanks, Blake. So just wanted to review a couple of the answers that we're seeing as the most common in the last poll about specific risks. Phishing, kind of leading the way, employees, sensitive data, lack of leadership, users caring, revenue loss. So thanks for everybody answering those. Those are some really good things that I think everybody that runs or is part of a business hopefully considers and thinks about. So I'm going to launch one other poll while I move into the next slide, and then we'll recap some of the answers on that here. And that question is going to be, what technologies are you using remotely to access network resources? So things like VPN, things like remote desktop web gateways, things like secure remote access system. And I'll move on to the next slide because I know we're running up on time here. So here are some tools and frameworks and best practices that you can utilize to kind of help you throughout this process and really understanding where your money needs to go, where your resources need to go. So we've got the cost of downtime calculator through PAX8. There's a link on the next page, and you'll see kind of an example that we have there. And then we're firm believers. Blake and I strongly believe in having a security framework to follow. And a couple really good ones that you can think about are the NIST cybersecurity framework, also called CSF 2.0. There's also a resources page that we'll be sending out with the slide deck. So if you guys want to actually look at that cybersecurity framework and kind of start with a plan, that would be my recommendation. I'm going to skip over the MITRE attack for a second, come back to that. CIS controls, that's another framework that you can follow and implement to really understand where you're potentially lacking in some security areas and some gaps that might exist that you need to target. Obviously, MFA, remote access, inventory management, asset management, going through old accounts, things like that you'll find in the CIS controls. And then the MITRE attack framework, some of you might have heard me talk about this already, but that's kind of stepping into the mind of a threat actor or a bad actor and how they operate and how they do reconnaissance first to be able to gain information about you, to build out campaigns, and then try to figure out and identify which gaps, which areas that they want to target, which employees they want to target to try to lead to a ransom incident. And then lastly, we've got a good slide with some cybersecurity best practices. I don't think we'll have time to go through and talk about each one, but like I said, it'll be in the slide deck so you guys can review those. So here's a quick calculating your cost of downtime, and I advise everybody to go through this. In this example, you can see along the left-hand side some of the costs associated with portions of the business. And then on the right here, you see the results. So if you plug in your information on this cost of downtime calculator, you'll really start to understand on a estimation basis, how much you'll actually lose in sales and productivity every hour of downtime, and how much that's going to result in a complete full day of downtime. So these are the links you'll see in the slide deck. Here are the cybersecurity best practices checklist. So even some of the things that may sound like old news. These are things we've done for 20 years, are things that we need to continue to be cognizant of. Making sure we're avoiding common words and passwords, making sure we're not reusing passwords across multiple accounts, MFA, etc., firewalls, all of those things. And I will turn it over to Justin, and then we'll get to Q&A shortly.
Yeah, I am also not going to go through all these because I want to leave a little bit of time for questions and answers. But some tips and takeaways, I'm going to focus on the right side, the green check marks, call to action, strengthening your business continuity today. These are some of the best things we think you can do. Assess your current cybersecurity posture, and just don't just do it once. Like, do this often. Continue. This is something that we should be continuing to do. Develop a business continuity plan. Always be prepared for worst case scenario. It's better to be prepared, and have a clear recovery strategy. Keep that up to date also. This is not something we just do once and forget about. We do what's called tabletop exercises where we'll actually exercise, what we would do in the event of a cyber attack. Implement the best practices, secure remote work environments, protect all of your sensitive data, and continuously monitor threats. I think what I keep saying over and over again is continuously, not just do it once. And then leverage expert guidance. If you're unsure about something, connect with us. We're always happy to educate or any other cybersecurity professionals. With that, we'll move on to some final thoughts and then some questions and answers. Yeah, final thoughts. Cyber threats are not a matter of if, but when. So early preparation is the key to minimizing the impact. Protect your business today by taking proactive steps towards security and continuity. And we want to thank you for joining us. Stay connected with Ontech for future updates and ongoing cybersecurity support. I encourage you to follow us on LinkedIn. We're always posting educational stuff. We have these webinars and coffee briefs pretty much once a month. So I encourage you to keep joining us for those. With that, I will open it up to some questions and answers, Q&A session. So if anyone wants to raise their hand, throw something in the chat, this is your chance.
Yeah, while we're waiting for that, Justin, I'll just go back to some of what technologies people are using for remote access. A lot of VPN I see in here. SSL VPN with MFA, app for phone, Automate RMM, MDM, RDC. So those are some really good ones. And we've got a question here, our hand raised with Ray H.
So my question for you would be, what would be a way that you could kind of harden or protect yourself against attacks, against maybe threats that don't quite exist yet? Like, how do you guys search or prevent against things like that?
Thank you for the question. It's a very good question. It ultimately goes back to the defense in depth slide that I showed earlier. That covers all aspects of a business. What's also required in addition to the defense in depth is constantly updating and getting threat intelligence from elsewhere. We've seen a lot of social engineering over the past couple of years, but as AI has become more and more prevalent, what we've seen is social engineering against AI, which, as ironic as that sounds, is a legitimate concern these days. Back in the days of when ChatGPT went public, a lot of online websites were using it to replace we're using it to replace chat agents. So it's very common, especially on pages like car dealerships. If you have any questions, you can talk to our road agent. ChatGPT was used to replace them, but what was not put in place was any sort of input validation. So people were using it to do their physics homework for free. So ultimately, to answer your question, staying up to date and constantly reviewing your security baseline, the security measures that are currently in place. It's unfortunately it's a non-stop. It's a non-stop. It's not one and done. It needs to be done continuously and regularly.
Yeah, we'll get to Jake in a second. I was also say modernizing tools, making sure that you're staying up to speed on the new tools that exist out there. Traditional antivirus, things like that can't keep up with some of the new evolving threats. So having something that has machine learning and some automation built into it can definitely help protect from new threats that are coming out there. And then we've got a question from Jake Corsi.
Hi. Yeah, my question is in regards to something along the lines of like phishing. So you could have the greatest, defense possible, and it's still just as strong as your weakest link, which, I'm pretty sure every company has issues getting people to get on board with, proper protocol and when it comes to emails. And I was wondering if you guys had any advice on that, I guess the social aspect of it, trying to convince people to get on board with that, to have safe practices and maybe even like the use of AI in um, scanning emails preemptively or something like that.
Uh, there's a couple of different methods. It depends on who you're trying to get on board. If it's the end user, you simply need to go over their head and have either their manager or their supervisor explain this is what needs to be done. Ideally, it wouldn't come to that, but that's ultimately the ace in the sleeve, or the ace in the hole, as the expression goes. When it comes to executives or for other business leaders, what I've had good experience with is ultimately coming down to costs and impact regarding business operations. Time lost is money lost. If you can prevent time from being lost, you can transitively prevent money from being lost as well. Uh, a great way to identify that is show how much productivity can be lost by someone simply clicking an email that they shouldn't have. That's even before a ransomware is deployed or anything along those lines. Just the simple time to investigate.
Yeah, I like what Thomas threw into the chat too. Thomas is our newest business development employee, and I think that's a really good point. Making it part of their annual review, add a cybersecurity component to evaluation. I even heard a business that I was doing a vulnerability assessment review with last week said that they incentivize their employees to complete their cybersecurity training. Employees that don't click on the phishing simulation examples that come out, they'll give them gift cards and they'll really incentivize them. So that's maybe another method to consider as well. I think driving adoption from the top down, it's really difficult to get employees to follow something if your leadership doesn't follow something. And specifically around cyber training programs, things like that. We see it all too often. There you go, Thomas. Go a year with no clicks and you get a free dinner. Yeah. Jake,
Thank you,
any
guys.
follow-ups to that?
No, that's good insight.
And Josh, it looks like you said your parent company has a good noodle board that people get good marks for reporting bad emails. I like that. Do they get noodles for that, or what's the reward there? Just the public recognition?
I think the reward's in the name. They get some good noodles as opposed to some bad or mediocre noodles.
Yeah. Oh, that's a SpongeBob reference. I should know that. We've got another from Ken Foth here. If a business that wants to use AI, would on-prem AI be best? Blake, I'm not sure if the risks of AI would be mitigated significantly by kind of doing your own AI within the premises of the building versus doing something like a public service. I think for me, I would say it comes down to, going through a proper assessment ahead of time, making sure that you're only connecting the systems and the data that you want that AI to be able to interface with. So really, I call it like security by design, whether that's running in the cloud or running, internally. It's really comes down to there is risk for the organization, there's risk for the hosting provider. Everybody has a little bit of a role to play with that, but I would think that you're probably going to be able to deliver a higher level of service through a cloud service than trying to run it internally, unless you have a massive team.
I'd also add it depends on what your objective with AI would be. If it's something along the lines of acting as a Google search, then yeah, on-prem AI would be more than suitable for that. But if it's something like generate a PowerPoint or generate a PowerPoint that features graphs from the last 5 years of profits and losses, that I would go to something along the lines of Copilot with. And just to reiterate what Jared said, in any event, it's ultimately going to come down to configuration, not only how you configure the AI, but how you also configure the rest of your environment from a security by design perspective. If the AI can be able to access information that it shouldn't have, on-prem or not, it's going to cause the same number of problems.
It's a good question. Think of developing an AI policy as well. A lot of the municipality work or local government work that we do starts with being part of a coalition potentially and really building out a policy, producing that policy, publishing it, making sure staff and employees are aware of what's allowed within the constraints of what the business wants to allow. So that's kind of an administrative control, not necessarily a technical one, but it's very important to have policies that you can relate um, to hold people accountable.
And we've got one from Josh in the Q&A chat. What would an AI policy look like?
That would depend entirely on which AI you're using, if you're using cloud or on-prem. Ideally, at the very least, it would limit end users from not using approved AIs. Uh, what I've seen in the past in the corporate world is, okay, in the cloud, being able to have, let me see here, having policies that describe and dictate what queries are and are not acceptable for being input into the AI, what other AIs they are not allowed to use or allowed to use, if any, as well as what information can be fed into those AIs. I'd also I would strongly recommend reviewing as well. AI it's a great tool. It can be incredibly useful, but it can also be incredibly inaccurate. It's a double-edged sword, unfortunately. So being able to have some sort of verification process rather than just having AI whip an email and automatically sending.
Yeah, and for me, Josh, I think about, primarily two things: what prohibited versus permitted activities, what kind of giving the guide rails or the guidelines around, okay, we are going to allow the use of specific AI tools, but these are the constraints. These are what we allow. These are the things that we don't allow, and kind of just making sure that we're not violating any data privacy laws or any regulatory compliance concerns that might exist for an organization. So it's kind of wrapping all of that around what's the strategy from the business's perspective and really what's allowed, what's not allowed. Did you have something else, Blake? Sorry if I cut you off there.
Oh, it's quite all right.
Say something.
One thing I would generally recommend doing is within the AI policy, having some sort of clause that would prevent it from being obviously detected as AI. The more and more businesses that are being that are being open to adopting AI and those that actively do use AI, it is going to be even more obvious that an AI wrote this. So having an AI do, let's say, like 70 to 80% of the work and having the last 20% of the work being actually done by the person, that is what I've seen to be the most successful. Having the AI create the policies it's it's a good idea, but there's the potential for an AI bias, which that's just a joke, but there are going to be things that are overlooked because it's not a one size fits all.
There's a couple places that we look when we look for kind of developing policies or policy templates. I would be lying if I said I don't look at AI or I don't utilize what exists in AI to kind of pool together the resources that are available out there to give me some of the best answers. But the NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, is a really good place to look. The SANS Institute is another good place where you can find some kind of policy templates and guidelines and things like that that you could implement a policy with. ISACA is another organization that you can really look for kind of how do you shape the future with AI and how you start your journey and how you keep it secure along the way. So I'll post those into the chat. That's a really good question. So yeah, it looks like Thomas and I are kind of in the same wavelength here for the thought process. Thomas posted the NIST artificial intelligence kind of governance and development and design, and then I posted the SANS Institute and what they have for that. If you go to the link I posted, you have to scroll down to the artificial intelligence acceptable use standard. But the reason I posted what I posted is it also has a lot of other things like just general acceptable use, data management, password management, password construction, all sorts of different things, mobile device management. So you can find a lot of different policies there. Thanks everybody for the questions.
And don't be afraid to reach out to us with any additional questions if something comes up after. I'll make sure that you have a way to get a hold of us. We want to thank you for your time. Thank you for your participation. That was very helpful to have some participation. Again, my name is Justin. We have Jared Olson and Blake Milkey. Find us at ontech.com. If you're not already connected with us, we'll find a way to connect with you, and you can hammer us with any additional questions that you have.
Thanks everybody. Go
Thank
ahead
you.
and end the
Thanks,
end the
everyone.
event here.